Where'd my Skittle go?
Okay. Your Skittle disappeared into the void of lost Skittles.
Actually, I dropped it on the
We are
ground.
on page 113 in your book. What does God say about marriage? Marriage is when, that's an old movie quote, and I don't know the rest of it, so I don't know why I started, but what does God say about marriage? So this was tied, number 3 and number 4, with the two categories that you guys wanted to talk about third most. This one and I can't remember the other one right now. Something like, what does God want from my life? I think was that one, but anyway, well, we'll talk about that one next time. This time we're looking at what does God say about marriage, and yeah, that's a lot to cover. So I'm hoping today we're going to talk about premarital purity, which is where you guys are at. I'd also like to talk about premarital cohabitation, which is kind of the opposite of premarital purity, followed by divorce and homosexuality. We'll touch on gender again, which is good because there's a few things that I wish I'd said better last time when we talked about gender. That was 2 weeks ago now. And I want to save some time at the end to discuss what God has to say about the unique roles of men and women as husbands and wives in marriage and in society, because that is extremely countercultural and is a real, just really cool. There's a lot to unpack there that the Bible has to say that we've lost as a society, even as a church, that I would love to see us get back. So to begin, we're on page 113 in your book. If you have a catechism with you, it will come in handy today, but I've never required it of you, so I won't, that's all right. I won't ever penalize anybody for not having it, because I never told you you needed it, but if you do have it, it may prove handy. In a perfect world, if you could have a perfect world, what would it be like?
Didn't we talk about this?
Well, first off, no sin.
Yeah, we had a similar exercise last week,
No.
but I'm going to hear it this week. Perfect world, no sin.
No babies dying. Actually, no dying.
No dying. Very good. We can extend the no dying thing to beyond the babies. Yeah. What about some things? Put it in the positive. If you take the word no off of certain attributes.
Everybody
No
has
war.
food and shelter and
Okay. Yeah.
No starvation. no
Needs
homelessness.
met.
No war.
No war. Okay. To put that in a positive way, I'm just going to write peace. Peace on earth. That sounds familiar. Heard that phrase once or twice. That's a good start. In God's perfect world, we're in the middle of page 113. If we want to see what God considers a perfect world, we need look no further than Genesis chapters 1 through 2, where we read about the perfect world He created. What do we know about life in the Garden of Eden? Read or listen to Genesis chapters 1 and 2 if you need reminders. I would encourage you to open your Bibles to Genesis 1 to 2. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to read some excerpts from Genesis 2 later on. That's where marriage gets
Don't worry,
introduced.
I'm first.
You're not right there, Brayden.
Yes, I am. See?
You weren't there when you said first.
you
You
were
know
at,
what?
you were at like the first.
All right. So what are some things about life in the Garden of Eden that we know?
That
Everything
it
was
was
perfect.
perfect. I would tell Adam.
Okay.
It's-
Some specific things.
It was
There was
beautiful.
animals.
They're animals, sure. We'll throw that in there. I'll put it in blue. Although to be honest, all of these things are also present in the Garden of Eden. But there were animals, sure.
There was no sin, right?
Yeah, we got that one. All 4 of the ones that were said are present in the Garden of Eden. No sin, no dying, needs met, peace on earth. But there's a lot of specific things about the Garden of Eden that we can talk about.
Fruit and trees.
Sure. Yep. I'll put trees here, animals and trees, and we don't need to underline this part because it's already blue. I'll throw fruit in a separate thing. Yeah, so there was no meat, right? Because animals didn't die, so there was no dying, and there were animals, so there's no meat, because meat is made from dead animals.
Meat is
So,
good.
yep. Yeah. For 1,000 bonus points, when did God officially declare meat as a good thing for people to eat?
I know.
What?
I know. I knew. I knew.
Give Tyson a chance. Tyson, what were you gonna say?
No, just give it.
Braden?
After Noah's flood.
After Noah's flood, very good.
I'm so good.
Did people eat meat before Noah's flood? Probably.
Yeah.
But God gives Adam and Eve every tree that bears fruit to eat in the Garden of Eden. During the curse, after the fall into sin, he kind of broadens the range to vegetables, the plants of the field they will eat. And then after Noah's flood, God says that every clean animal that has the breath of life in it, you can eat. And then the law of Moses has a very precise definition of what counts as a clean animal versus unclean, which we won't get into now because in the New Testament era, God declares all foods clean. He gives Peter this big vision of a bunch of unclean animals being lowered on a sheet from heaven, and God tells Peter to eat, and Peter's like, no way, God, I don't eat unclean food. And God has said, hey, what I have called clean, don't you call common. And then he sends some Gentiles to Peter, and Peter's like, oh, maybe God doesn't think those people are unclean either. And it turns out he didn't. But back to perfect world, animals, trees, fruits. We're missing at least one really obvious thing.
Water.
Okay, two really obvious things. You
People.
got water. People. Yeah, very good.
Yes.
People. That's what I was thinking of there. Yeah.
Ella?
Yeah.
Water's
I was
there
gonna say
too.
Elliot, but
Yeah. Water. I wrote water.
Okay.
Garden of Eden had 4 headwaters. 2 of them have familiar names, but they are not the same as the
The
Tigris and
Mississippi
Euphrates.
headwater.
No, I wasn't in there. Yeah, Tigris and Euphrates rivers are named as being in the Garden of Eden, but the modern Tigris and Euphrates rivers are from after Noah's flood. So the whole world, the whole face of the earth was like destroyed and remade in Noah's flood. So the present day Tigris and Euphrates rivers were named after the locations in the Garden of Eden. And then the one big thing that I want to talk about, it's not really a thing, so I don't blame you for not getting it, but it is the focus of our discussion today, is marriage.
Whoa.
Marriage is one of the few things that exists to this day that God instituted in the Garden of Eden before the fall into sin.
Yes.
God created the perfect marriage too. What did it look like? Tell me some things about God's perfect marriage.
One man, one woman.
Okay, one man, one woman, right? Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. One man, one woman. Those are number ones. There. What else?
Their faithfulness.
Faithful to each other? I'll put that there. I mean, to be honest, there was nobody else to be faithless with. But a faithful marriage is perfect marriage is a faithful marriage. So even though it was kind of faithful by definition, still good to have it there. What else do we know about marriage in the before the fall into sin? What did God tell Adam and Eve to do?
Not eat the fruit.
Besides that, Ella? Be fruitful and multiply. That's right. So that means that the sexy times existed before the fall into sin. So I told you we're going to talk about sexual purity a bit today, and it is worth noting that sex is part of God's perfect plan for marriage. So it is a good thing. People did not multiply with a pencil and paper like they do in math class. Yeah, you probably thought I was describing some bizarre thing. People, yeah, when God said be fruitful and multiply, he didn't mean arithmetic. He meant doing it the old-fashioned way. Page 114, next page. Fallen creation. Ever since the fall, humans have decided that they know better than God when it comes to, well, everything. What are some things that humans say about a perfect world that differ from God's creation? Let's focus on marriage. I don't really know exactly where they were, where the authors of the book are trying to take this discussion, but I'm going to focus on marriage. What are some things that humans glorify about marriage that are not part of God's plan?
Same-sex marriage.
Same-sex marriage, certainly.
I was gonna say that.
Okay. What else?
Multiple marriages, like a man can be wed to 2 different women.
Yeah, polygamy. And its close cousin, polyamory. Polyamory is when multiple people are romantically and sexually involved and they're not married. So polygamy is specifically marriage, and polygamy is illegal in the United States. So you don't actually see much polygamy happening because marriage is a legal estate. But polyamory happens a lot. There's no law that says you can't just everybody hop into bed together. So of course there are people that do that. What are some other things about marriage that reflect our fallen state? I think I'm going to add something up here. The word faithful should also be permanent.
Oh, divorce.
Yeah, there we go. That gets the wheels turning.
Yay.
So down here, I'm just going to put temporary. People have, we're going to talk about divorce, and divorce in and of itself is bad, but sometimes it is acceptable.
Yes.
But sometimes it isn't. So we're going to talk about when it is and isn't acceptable, but just kind of like killing somebody in self-defense is bad. Killing people is always bad, but killing somebody in self-defense is, justifiable. It could even be the lesser of 2 evils. And so also divorce is always bad, but sometimes it is acceptable, and we need to acknowledge that. But regardless, because marriage is meant to be permanent, anything that makes it temporary is bad. So divorce, and one of the reasons I'm beating around the bush on this is because some people advocate for like an expiration on marriages, like marriage should be a contract where you stay married for 10 years and then reevaluate your position at the end of 10 years. Yeah, that kind of really totally defeats the purpose. So, but I've heard people advocate for that with like a straight face. They're kind of missing the point. Speaking of, no, we'll leave it at that for now. We'll come back to it. Is there anything I missed? Sex outside of marriage, of course. Sex outside marriage is a huge problem.
Living inside the same household before marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's only really a problem because of the sex thing. If a man and a woman who are romantically involved actually could cohabitate and not obviously be having sex, then that'd probably be okay. But that just doesn't happen. If that does happen, then there's probably something wrong with their relationship, because they really should not be able to do that. It's just So the big issue with cohabitating in particular is that it's public, right? If a guy and a girl are dating and they fall into temptation and have sex together, that's a sin, and it can be confessed and forgiven, and they try again, and that's okay. But when a man and a woman go through the massive rigmarole of selling one of their houses and moving in together and setting up separate, I guess they wouldn't have separate bedrooms, but they fill out the change of address forms, and it is not easy to move in together. That's not something you do accidentally. That is something that you plan your entire life around, and that is a problem that elevates it to the level of now the church has to get involved, because this is a public and ongoing sin, and that is the kind of thing for which excommunication exists. The individual sins, even when they happen a lot, are easily forgiven if the sinner repents. But if you repent of living together with somebody you're not married to, then the fruit of repentance needs to be that you separate. And if you refuse to separate, then you're not really repenting. And so that's an issue. But most of those, thankfully, are resolved when they get married. And it's a lot easier to repent of premarital cohabitation after you've gotten married, which is why my usual solution is just get married now. Most people, by the time they come to me looking to marry them, they don't want to really get married in like 18 months when the wedding is planned. They want to get married now. And so I tell them, look, you're living in sin now. You're already planning on getting married. How's about we have a nice time of confession and absolution. You get yourself a marriage license and you get married by justice of the peace, or I'll do a private ceremony for you. And then we can still plan a big party for 18 months from now that all your friends and family come to. And that's a decent solution. A better solution for you all is not to end up in that situation in the first place. But, life gives you lemons. Marriage is a gift from God. God made marriage, and as much as we'd like to tell him what marriage should look like, he's the one who made it. So he gets to decide what it is. It's a beautiful gift. He made man and woman. He made sex. He made a way for children to be born. So, of course, the devil will want to distort this beautiful God-given gift called marriage. Let's refocus, though, and turn off the world's noise for a moment. Let's turn to the small catechism and remember what God designed for marriage. Turn in Luther's Small Catechism to questions 65 through 77. As a group, make a list of which of these questions you want to focus on today. Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I've made a list of the ones I think need to be focused on. If you have a catechism and want to figure out some other ones, that's fine. But
sounds like a dictatorship.
What? Yeah, I'm going to dictate to you what you'll learn. I'm the teacher. I think I have that prerogative. If you would like to learn something else,
You can ask.
okay.
You could
So
ask the question.
the first
Yeah,
question.
raise your hand.
The first question
I have
answer. All right. Let's focus. The first question answer is question 65. What is marriage? And I really like your catechism's answer because there's a lot to it. So I'm just going to define marriage with my green marker. Can you guys read the green marker okay back there?
I can.
You're not back. You're like the opposite of back there. You are as up here as it gets.
Well,
Leah, Elliot, Addison,
Yes.
Zoe, Rita? Okay, cool. Okay, so marriage is created by God. Yeah, like every word of this definition is worth learning. Created by God, and I'm going to put it in bullet points to make it a little bit easier. Lifelong union. Lifelong union of a man and a woman. It's understood that there's one man and one woman involved. I'm not going to write the numbers. Man and a woman for the mutual help and joy. And procreation and nurturing of children. Now, obviously, some marriages are not blessed with children, and that is okay. That doesn't make them any less of a child or any less of a marriage. Adoption is a wonderful solution if you are a married couple that cannot conceive for some reason. It's expensive, and I wouldn't judge you for not taking it, but yeah. A man and a woman enter into marriage by a public promise.
To adopt somebody?
Public promise to live
That's like a car.
faithfully together until death. Okay, this is just a great definition of marriage. So if you ever wonder, I mean, a lot of this stuff kind of comes naturally, but for example, we have the purpose of marriage built into here. God gave us marriage, sure, but why? It is for the mutual help and joy of man and woman, and for the procreation and nurturing of children. So this is why. This is the purpose of marriage. And so much of what's wrong with marriage and sexuality in the world today can be traced back to departing from this basic list here. Yeah, it's public. There are no private marriages. Even the law says you have to have, I think, 2 witnesses, at least 1 witness, in addition to the justice of the peace or the pastor, whoever performs the wedding, there needs to be additional witnesses. You do, yes. Yeah, so usually it's like the maid of honor and the best man.
So like you say, like remember how we talked about like they just get married like right away? Would they just have like one person there?
Oh yes, so like in a private ceremony, yes, there would still be one or two witnesses. I forget what the law demands, but there would be, and they would, so there's an actual form, like anything with the government, there's an actual form, it's the marriage license, but the marriage license has a lot of blank spaces where you're supposed to write names and stuff, and there's two places for witnesses to sign. So they write their name and then they sign their signature, and that means they have to be a legal adult, and that's probably about it, actually. but it becomes a matter of record that these two people are married and these two people have borne witness to the
Is it a
union.
long form?
Hmm?
It's no long form.
Not really. It's like one page and maybe only half of the page is stuff. You gotta write your, name of the bride, name of the groom, name of the officiant, address of the wedding, probably some other basic location stuff, city, state, zip, county, witnesses, and then a bunch of signatures of almost all of the people involved in the wedding. Okay, so that's what is marriage. That's an excellent place to start. Now this one focuses on the commandment, you shall not commit adultery, but we're focusing more on marriage and the positive. So that's what marriage is. It's nice sometimes to see what something is rather than just make a long list of what it isn't. So that's why I was trying to avoid that over there. I'm going to jump to question 68, which asks, how do we fear and love God in keeping the sixth commandment? And so marriage is kind of inextricably tied with the sixth commandment. Who remembers what the sixth commandment is?
You shall not, right?
You just say it, Elliot.
You shall not commit adultery.
Commit adultery, very good. I mean, you could have just said it too, Addison.
Why do you say it?
Elliot was raising his hand. That was the only reason I invited him to say it. Because I wasn't going to wait to call on anybody.
Elliot, well, I would have raised my hand, but Addison was over here. Oh, I know. And then she's like,
It's okay.
I did. Over 10.
So keeping the sixth commandments involves treating your body as holy. Right, so
I'm talking to a friend here.
Face the front.
okay, so treat your body as holy. And what does that mean? That means set apart for God's purposes. Not as objects for pleasure. I'm gonna summarize that here so you guys don't just watch me writing on the board all day. Okay, we're doing all right on time. Not as objects of pleasure, right? So that's a big problem with, and we see this over and over again. I know it's kind of highfalutin philosophy theory to be like, our culture treats the mind as greater than the body, but so many problems arise when you do that. When you act like your body is just some stupid little shell that your spirit is locked inside of, and it's disposable and you can do whatever you want with it. That is not the biblical view. And when you think that way, then if you don't like your body because it's male and you'd rather be female, or it's female and you'd rather be male, then you can just say, hey, my body's wrong. I want to change it to match my mind. And that's where the transgender movement comes from. But obviously here, if you treat your body as an object rather than a person, which is what it is because it's a part of who you are, if you treat it as an object for pleasure, then you can see how the culture falls into all of these sexual sins, homosexual behavior and premarital sex and stuff, because it's like, hey, sex feels really good, and it's just my body, so I'll do what I want with it. It's not like I'm hurting anybody, is the standard excuse for it. So yeah, God calls us to something higher than that. Your body is not an object for pleasure, not even your own pleasure. It is a part of who you are. It is holy because and I hope to get to this, but it's holy because Jesus died for it. Jesus bought you, all of you, with his blood, and so he rightly lays claim to your body. I should note here in your catechism, human beings often violate God's purposes for them as male and female by engaging in sexual sins. This includes consensual sins, that is, sins that everybody involved agrees with, such as fornication, which is just like sex outside of marriage, pornography, which is generally masturbation is the technical term that is very uncomfortable to say, looking at pictures and stuff, and then homosexual behavior. But it also includes coercive sexual sins, such as rape, incest, child sexual abuse, and other sexual assaults. Those violate the fifth commandment as well as the sixth. And I bring that up because if you or somebody you know has been the victim of a coercive sex act, that is nothing that you need to be ashamed of. They cannot take away your purity just because they have hurt you in that way. And that's a very serious thing. People often make light of it, but if it happens to you, it can feel like something has been taken from you, something horrible, and you'll never get it back, and that you're just dirt and less of a human or something like that. You can go to some really dark places after having suffered some kind of coercive sexual sin. And I want to say, as your pastor, that you did nothing wrong if you are the victim of that sort of thing. And rather, you are the victim, and something terrible has been done to you. And it's okay to feel bad or hurt, but what you should not feel is unloved or ashamed of yourself because something bad was done to you. It was not something wrong that you did. Moving on to the next one. How else do we fear and love God? By keeping the sixth commandment. By speaking and acting to one another as male and female in ways that build up rather than tear down. So I'm going to just summarize here. Build up and not tear down. And what we're talking about specifically here is crude talk and immodest dress and things like that. So, girls, you've probably noticed that you get a lot of male attention if you show a lot of your body. You may have even noticed just coming out of winter and exposing those legs with shorts that the boys notice things like that. And it can be very tempting to dress immodestly to seek that kind of attention. And that is tearing down your Christian brothers by leading them to sin sexually with their eyes and their minds. And gentlemen, it should go without saying, as Jesus himself says, anyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery against her. So if you see a girl or a woman who is dressed provocatively, you really should get in the habit of literally bouncing your eyes. I read that in a book. That's what it's called. You're looking around, innocently, and you see something that you recognize as something you shouldn't be ogling at. You should literally bounce your eyes, jerk your head away, do something to just avoid looking at that, because that will lead you to a dark place. It leads you to objectify the women that are made in God's image, and it leads you to be tempted to sin sexually in your own mind and imagination, possibly with your own body. So, build up, don't tear down. Crude talk. We shouldn't be making dirty jokes. I don't know what else to say about that. The Bible literally says don't make dirty jokes. I find it funny because the Bible doesn't usually moderate your humor, but it does when it comes to crudeness. Dirty jokes that make light of sex or sexual sin or even the institution of marriage. Although I've been really refreshed lately whenever I hear somebody online making fun of marriage or talking about how they hate their wife or whatever. It's called boomer humor now. So it's actually falling out of style to hate on the institution of marriage. And, of course that always comes with some qualifiers, but it's encouraging to see that people actually want to respect marriage. And what else was I going to say? Oh, comments about appearance, right? So this is, Some cultures, it's actually expected of men to catcall women, and hey baby, I shouldn't even do any impressions. I'm going to sound terrible up here. Yeah, it's just going to be cringy. So don't do it. Stop laughing at me.
Yeah,
I stopped myself
No, I'm laughing at the.
before I took
That
on
would
a
be cringy.
Cuban accents, and I can. Yes, I've done it to my wife as a joke once or twice, and it just doesn't feel right. Even when it's my own wife, I feel like I'm degrading her, tearing her down. So I feel like that's the way most, especially Minnesotan Americans, would feel about such talk. But don't be doing it. Letter C is the big one, of course. Save sex for marriage. This is huge. It is no coincidence that the rate of divorces in the United States and the legalization of no-fault divorce has skyrocketed in the 10 to 20 years following the sexual revolution in the 60s. The 1960s brought about something called the free love movement, where people were like, let's throw off the shackles of marriage and Victorian sexual mores, and let's just love whoever we want to love and have sex with whoever we want to have sex. This was before STDs were really well known, and one of the reasons why the AIDS epidemic was as bad as it got. And anyway, the free love movement had people having sex outside of marriage as the norm. And then when they finally did get married, it turns out that they were shackled to somebody that they didn't really want to be shackled to, and so they wanted divorces. And it used to be before the 80s that since a marriage is a legal institution, a divorce had to be legally established. You had to prove to a court of law that your spouse had cheated on you or otherwise violated the marriage covenant, and only then would you be granted a divorce. However, in the 70s and 80s, there were so many people who wanted divorces that the courts threw up their hands and were like, we can't, we can't do this all. And eventually, no-fault divorce became the norm, which it is now in all 50 states in the U.S., which means that if either party of the marriage wants to get a divorce, then you get a divorce. And they don't need to prove a fault. You don't even need to have both people wanting it. Because that was the crazy thing, right? Is there were some couples where both the husband and the wife wanted a divorce, and it was the law that said no, because you made a promise, and marriage is lifelong, and nothing has happened to violate your marriage covenant. You just don't like each other anymore. Well, tough. The law doesn't care who you love. The law says that you need to be married. And now, 60 years later, the law is absolutely like, just marry whoever you love. So love is never meant to be the foundation of marriage. Your commitment to one another is the foundation of marriage. Love is a feeling that comes and goes. And love is an action that you should choose to do. But what it is not is the foundation of marriage. And all of that to say that if we would just save sex for marriage, then we would not get these feelings of love for somebody that is actually a terrible person. Because that's what happens, right? You have sex and you get these rose-colored glasses and you think, that person is just so wonderful. Because that's what sex does. It's great for marriage. When you really don't like your spouse and then you hop into bed with them, you come out the other side of that experience and you like each other a lot more. But outside of marriage, all that does is give you rose-tinted glasses that makes you think this, terrible person is actually pretty cool. And then you marry them, and then the glasses come off, and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm shackled to a monster, and I'm stuck with them. And if you just save sex for marriage, then you are a lot less likely to get stuck in a marriage that you hate. And then you won't even want a divorce, so that you won't need to worry about getting one. Letter D. Refrain from lustful, it's kind of the same thing as above. From lustful desire and activity. And they include here the homosexual stuff. So, obviously, your body is set apart for God's purposes. God's purposes is that your sexuality be experienced in a marriage, which is defined as being between a man and a woman. Therefore, you should not use your body for homosexual desire and activity. Now, I'm going to talk about this now because I don't know if we're going to get this far at the rate I'm going. Some people, when they're about your age, frankly, everybody, when they're about your age, begins to develop sexual feelings, and it's usually for the opposite sex. But there are some people who find that they're developing sexual feelings for people of the same sex, and it's not their choice. I like to emphasize this because a lot of people think it's a choice. Generally older people. They think, oh, the gay people, how can you choose? How can you want to have sex with another man? That's just so gross. And yes, it is gross to me and to heterosexual men, but some people have those feelings. And I'm not saying the feelings aren't real, but, I have a lot of feelings that are wrong. You think just because I'm married that I don't sometimes find other women attractive? Of course I do. I'm a man. But those feelings are wrong, and I don't act on them, and I don't nurture them, and I, try to push them out of my head. I bounce my eyes, that sort of discipline, and I don't allow my feelings, my sinful feelings, to become sinful actions or a sinful lifestyle. And that is the same calling that those with homosexual feelings have, that they are not to let their sinful feelings become sinful actions. I freely admit that the burden of a homosexual is far greater than the burden on me because I have a wife. and I recognize it's a great burden, but everybody has different burdens. Some people are born with the propensity to become alcoholics. I can have a drink and be fine. Some people can have a drink and it sends them into a decades-long spiral into deep, dark places. And those people have a greater burden than I do. And we all as a society seem comfortable admitting that. But when it comes to homosexual feelings, it's like, oh no, we can't tell them how to feel or how to behave or whatever. It's like, yes, we can. That's actually like the church's business, is telling people how to handle their sinful desires so that they don't become sinful actions. So that goes for homosexuals as well. So you can be a Christian who experiences homosexual attraction. That's okay. Just like you can be a Christian who experiences heterosexual attraction for women or men to whom you're not married. That's still sinful and still needs to be resisted and repented of and is forgivable. So yeah, it's, I don't know, to me it's not that complicated. I think the world just gets offended at the idea that I would put an unfair burden on somebody who experiences homosexual attraction. And I mean, I'm not the one who put the burden on them. God did. Take it up with him. God gives everybody different burdens to bear, and he promises his Holy Spirit to comfort and strengthen us as we bear them. And then finally, letter E, this one's more positive. Treasure your spouse. As God's gift to you. Treasure your spouse as God's gift to you. This is more for married couples, although you guys can look forward to it, but it's really helpful, especially when you're in a fight with your husband or wife, to remind yourself that this is God's gift to you. My wife is God's gift to me, and she is a wonderful gift even when I'm mad at her and really questioning whether I chose wisely. She is God's gift to me, and the more you treasure your spouse as God's gift to you, the better that develops a good habit of thinking of your spouse that way, and good habits become good lifestyles and happy marriages. I want to talk about divorce. Let's see, what happens I hit? Let me just read. I closed my catechism, darn it. Were there any specific questions that any of you guys with catechisms wanted to talk about? You can just throw out a number if you want. You don't want to say words. These are uncomfortable words. How about anybody who voted for this topic, or even if you didn't, were there any specific things that you wanted to discuss?
Different race marriages.
Interracial marriages, okay. Do you guys remember the homework assignment I gave on
I remember.
Like the 2 pages on
Yes, it was a 2-page article. It was a double-header assignment. It was all about interracial marriage, actually. Well, it began and ended with interracial marriage, and in the middle was a big discussion on race. So the long and short of it is there is no such thing as interracial marriage because there's no such thing as separate races. We are all the human race, and everything beyond that is just a matter of your skin color, which is a matter of what part of the world your ancestors survived in, right? So people with dark skin, they have more protection from harmful sun rays, which is good when you live near the equator and you are exposed to a lot of harmful sun rays. People with light skin receive more sun rays, which is good in places where you don't get much sunlight because you need all the vitamin D you can get. So your skin color is more a reflection of where your ancestors lived than anything else. The only issue of race that we need to think about is the race of God's people versus the race of not God's people. And that is not a blood-related race. That is a faith-related race. You should only marry other Christians. The Bible says you should not be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. That goes for marriage, business partnerships, even like really tight friendships. You should only, it's good to be friends with non-Christians, but like your best friends, the ones that you trust with anything, the ones whose advice you earnestly seek, those need to be people who share your deepest values. Those need to be Christians. And it goes without saying that your spouse, absolutely, you shouldn't even date somebody who isn't a Christian. Don't even entertain that. If they don't love Jesus, then they're not for you. They can be your friend, but they cannot be your spouse. Were there any specific race-related questions you wanted answered, Elliot? Nope, that was it? Okay. So yeah, that article, it was assignment 10-11, I think, because it was a doubleheader. So yeah, if you want to reread that article on your own time, it really lays out a strong case.
Talk about it at all during like a...
I don't think we actually talked about it. I was using it more as an example of how a biblical worldview and a biblical understanding of human history leads you to make healthy choices.
Okay.
And it's easy nowadays, nowadays our culture is all about don't be racist or whatever. But when Darwinism first started, it was extremely popular. In fact, it was considered scientifically proven that different races were inferior to others. Charles Darwin proposed that humans evolved from intelligent chimpanzees, Europeans evolved from intelligent chimpanzees, whereas Africans evolved from the brutish gorillas. So, their facial features still look like those of a gorilla, and they're very strong, but also not very smart. And the Asians evolved from orangutans, and I don't know what that means actually, as far as what they're like. But I know that he made the European people look smart and the African people look dumb, and he related that to their supposed descent from different species of ape. And this was believed around the world for like over 100 years probably, before finally just only recently, like in the last 40 or 50 years, has genetics come far enough that we can prove that all humans are descended from one woman through your mitochondrial DNA, and from one man through the Y chromosome. They're called mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. So yeah, all humans are descended from the same common ancestor, which we already knew because the Bible says so. So it took modern science a good century and a half to go in some dark places. The Holocaust and things like that was all about purifying the Aryan race. Before we finally circle around and be like, hey, look at that. The Bible was actually right. Just like we should have thought a long time ago. Let's talk about divorce. I know I said I was going to read through these things better. I should have, I did read through these to prepare, but it's a lot to read. So, let me see. 72 talks about cohabitation. This one was a homework question, but it's been a couple years. So, what is the Christian view of living together apart from marriage, which is cohabitation? God's will for our lives is violated in several ways when a man and woman live together in a sexual relationship without being married. Cohabitation fails to honor God's gift of marriage, first, by not actually entering into marriage, so you're trying to get all the benefits without any of the risk. By separating sexual activity from the marriage union, in which a man and woman have made a publicly recognized lifelong promise of faithfulness, and by confusing or deceiving others, often including children, about the nature of the couple's relationship, suggesting a commitment to marriage that is not in fact there, or assuming that cohabitation is a valid test of future marital success. If you have to lie to kids about your life choices, you have made some bad life choices. That is a good rule of thumb. And a lot of people have told a lot of lies to children because they don't want to have to explain why they choose to live together like monkeys instead of getting married and committing to one another like humans ought to do. There is so one of the purposes of marriage is that you are stuck together. This is a lifelong union that you publicly promise to do. So like, it's not a private thing where you can just decide to quit and be done. No, your friends and your family, they know that you have made this lifelong commitment to live faithfully together until death. And because of that, there is a certain safety that happens. If my wife and I get into a really big fight, and one of us storms out of the house and maybe even spends the night in a hotel somewhere, let's say my wife did it and it's my perspective, I know because of this commitment that we made to each other, she's coming back. I don't need to tell my kids that their mother is gone because she's coming back. We will work through this, and she knows that we have to work through this too. And we're not going to break up just because things get rough, but we're going to work on how to get along together. And we can even seek a counselor, like a marriage counselor. The only time anybody ever comes to me for marriage counseling is after they have already decided to get a divorce. And they're like, well, the cat's going to get out of the bag sooner or later. I better tell pastor. When they need to come to me is a couple years before they choose to divorce, when the problems are definitely there, but are something that can be worked on and worked through. And nobody ever does that for some reason. People like to pretend like they don't have problems. We're happy plastic people with our shiny plastic smiles, and we don't like to admit when things are wrong until it's too late, and then it's too late. But when both partners are committed to the vow that they make in the wedding, not to their love, not to whatever they think they're getting out of the marriage, but when they are committed to the promise that they have made, and that promise is the foundation of their marriage, then everything else is something you can work through. You know, you're either going to live together miserable or you're going to work it out. And if neither of you wants to live together miserable, then you're gonna pony up to the table and work some things out. And that doesn't get a lot of attention. It's so easy to just say, nah, I'm done with you, and leave and just not look back. And when that happens, it tears families apart because, of course, one of the primary purposes of marriage is for the procreation and nurturing of children. And any of you children who've been through divorce, or if you know somebody who has, you know how painful that can be. Shoot, one of my sons, my son came home crying the other day. One of them, I'm not going to give names, but one of my sons came home crying the other day because one of his best friends is moving because his mom has to leave to go somewhere else because there's a divorce in the family, and so he's not going to be in town, and that made my son very sad. So, imagine how the poor kid feels, let alone my son who's just losing a friend that he has only known for a couple of years. But the poor kid is getting uprooted in his life because his parents are divorcing. And, it's just bad. Divorce is bad. That said, divorce is permissible in some situations. Who remembers what those situations are?
I know one of them.
Addison, okay.
Abuse.
Abuse, yeah.
Or I can't remember what they were.
Okay, so the two biblical reasons are unfaithfulness. So, like your husband is sleeping with another woman, then you can give that gentleman the boot and filter that noun a couple times. You can give that pig the boot and not feel any pangs of conscience there. He's the one who broke the marriage covenant. You are just acknowledging it. And of course, same works with the sexes reversed and all that. So that's unfaithfulness, adultery. If the spouse commits adultery, the marriage covenant can be dissolved. And the other one is if the spouse abandons you. Paul tells Christians who are... So in Paul's day, a Christian would end up married to a non-Christian simply because they were both non-Christian and then one of them converted. And Paul was like, so if you have a spouse who's not a Christian, don't divorce them, but if they leave you, don't chase after them. You can let them go. So if your spouse chooses to abandon you, you are not shackled to them by marriage. And generally, we kind of extrapolate abuse to be a sort of abandonment. He's being abusive. He's abandoning you in a, physical, emotional sense. Even in those cases, I try to encourage couples to stay together. But in the case of abuse, I want to be like, your safety comes first. If the wife can stay with her mom and try to, encourage her husband to get counseling, and if her husband actually seems to be reforming himself, then there may be hope for that marriage. But if the wife can't stay married to the husband for practical reasons, then that might have to be the end of that. I wanted to say one last thing, because this touches on gender identity, and I lost the page again. It's question 77. And I really liked what your catechism says, and I did not say it when we talked about gender identity. The question is, what is the Christian perspective on persons who are confused about their sexual identity? I already talked about the setup here. So what we need to remember in questions of sexual identity. First, your chief identity, your number one identity, is that you are a baptized child of God. You are God's child and you are an heir of heaven. Everything else about yourself comes second or more to that fact. Secondly, you have an identity as a male or female, and that identity is inscribed on your body. And if your feelings differ from your body, then you need to recognize that your feelings are in the wrong here. We need to respect God's intentions for us as male and female. Ella, question?
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay.
Okay, so with marriage, how would it work if your spouse died or something like that?
The marital union is a lifelong union, and the marriage vow itself always includes the line, "Till death do us part." Or some moron who edited our hymnal says, "Till death us do part," which is so stupid. I don't know why. Our hymnal also says, "I will" instead of "I do." They're like going out of the way to ruin weddings. Anyway, to answer your question though, once a spouse dies, then the other is free from the marriage covenant and can remarry without committing adultery. Good question. There was a question posed to Jesus, what if a woman has multiple husbands because one died and then she married and then he died and stuff? When they all get to heaven, who's going to be her husband there? Jesus says, we won't have marriage in heaven. We're not going to reproduce. There'll be no marriage. They can all just be very good friends, and that will be just fine. So yeah, you don't have to feel feelings of loyalty to your dead spouse if you are ready to move on, emotionally. Take time to grieve. But if your spouse dies and you are ready to move on, don't feel like you are morally bound to the person who has died. Remember to be obedient to God's command that all desires for sex be curbed and disciplined until we're married. Remember that while most people marry, God's word also praises and blesses those who serve him by living chastely without marrying. In other words, you can choose to be single, and that is pleasing to God. Single people can do things that married people can't do. If there were a missionary position in Africa, I could go there if I weren't married. I could just be like, Africa, wow, never thought of it. Okay, God, let's go to Africa. I can't do that. I'd have to convince my spouse. I'd have to tear up my children after tearing them up 3 years ago from the friends that they loved and knew their whole lives. I'm not going to do that to my family. but as a single man, I could. There are a lot of things that you can accomplish as a single person that become extremely complicated after you're married, let alone having children. And then finally, seek the assistance of parents, also pastors, counselors, or other Christian professionals where that is needed and beneficial. And finally, trust that God's grace is sufficient for us and look to Christ for daily forgiveness, strength, and contentment. I think that's a great place to conclude this discussion. God's law says a lot of good things that we should learn and practice, but God's gospel says the greatest things, and that's the most important. I have homework to return once you have your graded homework and also an assignment. Actually here, Ella, can I please ask you to pass these out? These are the ungraded, the homework that's due tomorrow.
I already have one. Tomorrow.
This is Ella's. Next week, you know what I meant. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, whoa.
Elliot.
I'm supposed to turn this in.
Oh, no.
Reverse alphabetical order here.
99.
There we go. Oh yeah, I'll take that.
Yep.
Great.
1, 8.
Record.
Oh yeah, you can record. Thank you.
Okay.